Angel Reese was traded, and Chicago didn't even flinch. There was no drama, no hesitation, and no second-guessing. Just a quiet Tuesday morning and a franchise moving on from one of the most recognizable names in women's basketball. A two-time All-Star, a rebounding record holder, and a walking double-double was suddenly gone. And that's where things become even more interesting. In a league now dominated by the spotlight surrounding Caitlin Clark, where every possession is dissected, every stat amplified, and every star turned into a headline, Chicago made a move that went completely against the narrative. While everyone else chased star power, viral moments, and explosive box scores, the Sky stepped back and chose a different direction. So while the internet insisted they had given up a superstar, a tougher question emerged. What if they didn't? What if this wasn't about losing talent, but escaping an illusion? Because if Angel Reese truly was that franchise-changing player, the trade wouldn't have happened quietly. It would have sparked chaos. But it didn't. And that silence is where the Real story begins. A story built on numbers, consequences, and uncomfortable realities. Let's start with the numbers, because this is where most people's understanding of the situation begins to fall apart. On the surface, the stats look impressive. Double-doubles, all-star selections, and a rebounding record that could stand for years. If you skim a stat sheet without context, Reese appears to be exactly the kind of player you build around. But when you dig deeper, the picture changes. Angel Reese shot just 39% from the field in 2024. For a post player whose game revolves around operating close to the basket, someone not asked to create off the dribble, pull up in transition, or stretch the floor, that number should have raised serious concerns across the league. She improved slightly to around 42% in 2025, and supporters pointed to that as progress. And yes, 42% is better than 39%, but it still told defensive coordinators exactly how to guard her, and they did. Her three-point shooting hovered around 18% in both seasons. Not 28%, which would already be considered low, and not even 22%, which might at least force defenders to think twice. 18% became more than a weakness. It became a strategic advantage for opposing teams. Defenders didn't have to respect her beyond the arc. They could step inside, clog the paint, and wait. She simply wasn't going to punish them from distance, and the data confirmed it night after night. But the piece that truly complicates the rebounding record is often overlooked. A significant portion of those record-breaking rebounds came off her own missed shots. She would establish position, attempt a contested look near the rim, miss, and then grab the rebound as it bounced back. The box score counted it as a rebound, but it didn't account for the wasted possession, the disrupted rhythm, or the defense resetting while Chicago's offense started over. Two possessions were often used just to return to the same point. Over time, that pattern added up. Beyond missed shots and rebounding totals, there were also questions about playmaking. There weren't consistent passes from the post creating opportunities for cutters, no reliable pick-and-roll reads opening space for guards, and limited decision-making that simplified the game for teammates. Chicago often relied on a player who needed extra touches and extra possessions to produce numbers that more efficient players could generate in a single sequence. As the all-star selections piled up, the team struggled to develop momentum, and the win column quietly slipped away. Now compare that stretch to what was happening in Indiana at the same time. Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA as a rookie and immediately shattered expectations, breaking 62 records in a single season while helping the Indiana Fever reach the playoffs for the first time in 9 years. But what truly separated Clark wasn't just the records. It was the impact on everyone around her. Kelsey Mitchell elevated her game. Aaliyah Boston thrived with improved spacing and playmaking. Lexi Hull found open looks she had rarely seen before. The entire structure of the team improved because of Clark's presence, transforming Indiana into a far more dynamic and cohesive unit. That improvement came from the way Caitlin Clark controlled the offense, pulled defenders away from the paint, and found open teammates at the exact moment before defensive windows closed. That is what making a team better truly looks like. That is the standard. And when measured against that benchmark, the difference between what Clark delivered in Indiana and what Angel Reese delivered in Chicago wasn't minor, it was enormous. It became a clear contrast between leadership and noise within the WNBA conversation. Even if someone wanted to challenge the basketball analysis, arguing that efficiency numbers were misleading or that Chicago's roster was too flawed for any one player to fix, the off-court timeline still made this trade feel inevitable. The basketball concerns and locker room tensions didn't exist separately. They built on each other month after month until the situation became too complicated for any front office to manage long-term. Early in the 2025 WNBA season, before the year had even settled in, Angel Reese publicly alleged that she had experienced discrimination during a game in Indiana. The league took the claim seriously and launched a formal investigation, but ultimately found no evidence to support the allegation. The situation concluded without substantiation, yet it set an important tone. Instead of handling the issue internally and allowing performance to answer questions on the court, the controversy became public immediately, pulling the entire organization into an early season distraction. That moment shaped the atmosphere that followed, and the front office took notice. The situation involving Courtney Vandersloot is another key moment that often gets overlooked. During the season, Vandersloot suffered an ACL injury and entered the long, difficult process of rehabilitation. She was working quietly behind the scenes, focused on returning to help a team she had specifically chosen. While she was sidelined, Reese made public comments suggesting that the team could not rely on Vandersloot's return due to her age and that Chicago needed younger players with championship-level competitiveness. Those remarks were delivered openly about an injured teammate, which added tension to an already difficult situation. Understanding who Courtney Vandersloot is makes those comments even more significant. She is a two-time WNBA champion, a five-time All-Star, and a two-time All-WNBA first-team selection. She left a strong championship contender to join Chicago and help build something meaningful. She wasn't a fringe player who could be dismissed without consequences. When those remarks surfaced, players across the roster took notice. It created a perception that relationships within the locker room could become fragile, and that trust might be difficult to maintain under those circumstances. Camila Cardoso, Reese's frontcourt partner and a cornerstone of Chicago's future, became another piece of the puzzle. Cardoso shared the paint every night, working in tandem on rebounds, screens, and defensive positioning. Reports suggested tensions developed during the season, eventually leading to a moment where Cardoso walked out, an indication of how strained the environment had become. When a partnership that closes fractures, it becomes extremely difficult to repair. Chicago's long-term plan centered around building with Cardoso, and maintaining that direction while the tension remained proved challenging. Then came a September 2025 interview with the Chicago Tribune, where Reese stated that the team needed to bring in better players and stop settling for the results they had achieved. On the surface, those comments could be interpreted as a player pushing for improvement. But within the broader context of the season, combined with previous tensions, they added another layer to an already complicated situation, further reinforcing the sense that change was becoming unavoidable. Some may interpret those comments as a player demanding higher standards and refusing to accept mediocrity. But the timing mattered. Angel Reese made those remarks while still under contract with the very teammates she was publicly criticizing. Those players would inevitably read the interview. Their families would read it. Players across the league would read it and form opinions about what it meant to share a locker room with her in Chicago. That wasn't accountability, and it didn't resemble leadership. It looked more like a player undermining the environment she was still expected to help build. The situation escalated when the Chicago Sky suspended Reese for conduct detrimental to the team. Shortly afterward, she accumulated her 8th technical foul of the season, which triggered another automatic suspension. Following that, she did not return for the final games of the season, with the team citing a back injury that surfaced around the same time. Videos of her dancing in Las Vegas began circulating online. Regardless of how anyone interpreted that timing, the suspension itself carried the most important organizational meaning. Suspensions for conduct detrimental to the team rarely stem from a single moment. They usually follow months of internal conversations, warnings, and attempts to resolve issues privately. By the time a team formally documents that kind of action, it signals that quieter solutions have already failed. That official step often becomes the turning point. Once the suspension existed on record, Chicago had the documentation needed to justify a major move. They could show that they had attempted to manage the situation, pursued resolution, and ultimately reached a decision through legitimate organizational processes. From that moment forward, the trade no longer felt hypothetical. It became a matter of timing and return value rather than possibility. Atlanta, meanwhile, presented the acquisition of Reese as a major step toward contention. The front office described her as a dynamic talent and an ideal cultural fit, framing the move as a championship puzzle piece falling into place. But once the excitement faded, questions about roster construction began to surface. The Dream already featured Brianna Jones and Brittany Griner anchoring the front court. Jones had delivered strong production and earned all-star recognition, while Griner remained one of the most established interior presences in the league. Both players operate primarily in the paint, rely on touches near the rim, and require spacing to be effective. Adding Reese, another interior-focused player with limited three-point range, created a crowded front court. With three bigs occupying similar spaces on the floor, offensive spacing becomes compressed. Opponents don't need complicated defensive schemes in that situation. They simply pack the paint, eliminate driving lanes, and challenge Atlanta to beat them from the perimeter. That defensive approach doesn't just affect the bigs, it impacts the guards as well. Alicia Gray finished near the top of MVP voting, and Ryan Howard delivered an all-star caliber season. Both players thrived in a system that relied on spacing, movement, and open driving lanes. Their effectiveness depended on defenders being stretched across the floor. If the paint becomes crowded with multiple non-shooters, that environment changes dramatically. Pull-up opportunities shrink, cutting lanes close, and overall offensive rhythm becomes harder to maintain. This is why Atlanta's fan base responded with mixed reactions. Supporters who closely followed the team understood that spacing and chemistry were central to their success. Their concerns weren't driven by outside speculation, but by an understanding of how the roster had functioned previously. Alongside the basketball questions, there was also the cultural factor. Atlanta had watched everything that unfolded in Chicago. The public comments about teammates, the suspension, and the locker room tension. Despite that history, they chose to believe a new environment would lead to a different outcome. That type of gamble has been made repeatedly in professional sports. Sometimes it works, but often the challenges follow the player rather than staying tied to one organization. Atlanta had built chemistry around Gray and Howard, and now they were introducing a player whose previous team had formally documented conduct detrimental to the team. Changing uniforms doesn't automatically erase that history. It simply shifts the environment where those dynamics play out. From Chicago's perspective, the trade represented something deeper than a basketball decision. It was about reclaiming stability. For months, the organization had been managing off-court distractions that drained time and energy. There were public controversies, strained relationships, and disciplinary actions. Each situation required attention from coaches, executives, and teammates. Once Reese was moved, that weight lifted. The front office could refocus on long-term development instead of damage control. Practices could proceed without tension lingering in the background. The locker room atmosphere shifted, and that type of change often becomes the foundation for rebuilding. Chicago's new direction centers around Camila Cardoso, one of the most promising young centers in the league. Cardoso offers defensive instincts, strong footwork, and natural touch around the basket. Her game fits modern offensive systems and creates opportunities for teammates rather than consuming possessions. Reports suggested she had also reached her limit with Reese during the season, reinforcing the idea that building around both players simultaneously wasn't realistic. When forced to choose, Chicago prioritized the younger player whose trajectory aligned with their long-term vision. The return Chicago received, future first-round picks and draft flexibility, was criticized by some observers as underwhelming. But when true franchise players hit the trade market, teams usually respond aggressively. They offer premium assets, proven veterans, or high-value draft picks. In this case, the broader league response was quiet. Other teams evaluated the full picture, performance metrics, efficiency concerns, and locker room dynamics, and chose not to engage heavily. That silence effectively became the market's valuation. Chicago didn't necessarily win the trade in a traditional sense. They didn't receive a blockbuster package. Instead, they gained something less visible but equally important: clarity, stability, and direction. With Reese gone, the organization moves forward with a fresh start, new leadership, and renewed focus. Atlanta, meanwhile, begins its own gamble, betting that a change in environment will unlock a different version of the player. The rest of the league continues to evolve. Caitlin Clark remains a central figure shaping narratives. Aaliyah Boston anchors Indiana's growth. Teams adjust, rebuild, and reposition themselves. Trades like this rarely reveal their true impact immediately.